You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius. So picture this. It's 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. You're sitting in the most important meeting of your career. The room is silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Every eye in that conference room is on you. The VP of operations just asked you a question you did not see coming. Your throat tightens. Your vision narrows. Your mind, the same mind that rehearsed this presentation 100 times, goes completely terrifyingly blank. And in that exact moment, you do what most people do. You panic. Not out loud, not visibly, but inside, something breaks. The thoughts start flooding in like water through a cracked dam. What if I say the wrong thing? What if they can see how scared I am? What if this is the moment everything falls apart? That's not weakness, that's biology. That's what happens when a human brain that wasn't trained for pressure gets ambushed by it. But here's what nobody ever told you, and this is the part that changes everything. Pressure doesn't break you. The lack of training does. There are people in this world who walk into that same conference room, face that same question, feel that same biological surge, and instead of crumbling, they clarify. They get sharper. They get calmer. They find language they didn't even know they had. What do those people know that you don't? That's what this book is about. This is the Stoic mindset, a system for training your mind to maintain logic, clarity, and decisive action in the highest pressure moments of your life. We're not talking about motivation. We're not talking about generic positivity. We're talking about a battlefield-tested, neuroscience-backed, philosophy-grounded approach to one of the most underrated skills on the planet, the ability to think straight when everything inside you is screaming to panic. The Stoics knew this 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius led an empire under constant threat of collapse and wrote about staying calm. Epictetus was born into slavery and developed a mindset so unshakable that his ideas are still shaping elite military training today. Seneca built and lost fortunes, navigated political corruption, and faced death with the kind of composure that makes you wonder what he knew that we've forgotten. They knew that pressure is not the enemy. Poor mental preparation is. And in the next 15 chapters, you're going to learn exactly how to build the kind of mind that doesn't just survive pressure. It uses pressure as rocket fuel. Let's begin. Why pressure collapses untrained minds. Instantly. Here's a truth that will make you uncomfortable if you're being honest with yourself. Most people have never actually trained their minds. Not once. Not intentionally. Not in any systematic way. They've trained their bodies, maybe. They've taken courses, earned degrees, built professional skills. But the actual machinery of the mind, the thought patterns, the emotional regulation, the ability to stay rational under fire, that part has been completely left to chance. And then, life throws pressure at them. Real pressure, the kind with consequences, the kind that has an audience, the kind where the stakes actually matter. And the untrained mind does exactly what any untrained system does when it's pushed beyond its capacity. It breaks. The mechanism is well understood. When you face a high-stakes situation, a difficult confrontation, a critical performance moment, a sudden crisis, your amygdala, the brain's ancient alarm system, detects a threat. It doesn't distinguish between a physical threat and a social one. It doesn't know the difference between a lion and a disapproving boss. It just knows danger and responds accordingly. Cortisol floods your bloodstream. Adrenaline follows. Your heart rate spikes. Blood gets redirected away from your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, clear communication, and sound decision-making, and toward your muscles. Your body is preparing you to fight or run, not to deliver a quarterly earnings analysis. In other words, pressure literally makes you dumber in the short term. And if you've never trained for it, you have no system for overriding that response. This is what creates what most people call choking. A surgeon in Houston who has performed the same procedure 300 times makes a critical error during the one case that has cameras in the room. A college quarterback who has thrown that particular route thousands of times in practice forces a throw into coverage with the championship on the line. An entrepreneur in San Francisco who knows their business model cold stumbles through their pitch in front of the one investor who could change everything. These aren't failures of skill. They're failures of mental preparation for pressure. The untrained mind also defaults to a particularly destructive pattern under stress, catastrophizing. It doesn't just see a challenge. It sees the worst possible version of the challenge, multiplied by the worst possible consequences, wrapped in a narrative of personal inadequacy. The internal voice stops being a coach and becomes a prosecutor. You're going to fail. Everyone can see it. You've always been this way. This is proof that you don't belong here. That voice isn't truth. It's biology operating without training. And here's what makes it so dangerous. The more you believe it, the more your body responds to it, and the more your performance degrades, which seems to confirm what the voice was saying. It becomes a self-fulfilling collapse. There's another critical mistake that untrained minds make, and it's perhaps the most insidious. They try to eliminate pressure entirely. They think the goal is to feel nothing, to be perfectly calm, to arrive at high-stakes moments without any physiological activation whatsoever. This is backwards. Zero activation means zero performance. The research on what's called the Yerkes-Dodson curve has been around for over a century. Performance actually improves as arousal increases, up to a point. Too little activation and you're sluggish, disengaged, operating below your capacity. The right amount of activation sharpens you. It focuses you. It makes you faster and more precise. The problem isn't pressure. The problem is pressure that exceeds your trained capacity to channel it. Champions aren't people who don't feel pressure. They're people who have trained their response to it. Think about the Navy SEALs. Their training isn't just physical brutality. It's deliberate psychological conditioning. They are methodically placed in situations where their minds want to quit, where every biological signal says stop, and they are coached to stay rational, communicate clearly, and execute effectively despite all of that noise. The training doesn't make the discomfort go away. It builds a mind that can operate through the discomfort. Think about elite traders on Wall Street during a market crash. While most people are making decisions driven entirely by fear, the best traders in the room are actually calm. Not because they feel nothing, but because they've trained for exactly this. They've built protocols. They've rehearsed their responses. They've stress-tested their thinking. When the alarm goes off, they don't scramble. They execute. The gap between those who collapse under pressure and those who thrive is not talent. It is not luck. It is not personality type. It is training. And here is the most important thing you need to understand before we go any further. Your mind is trainable. Every single response we've talked about, the catastrophizing, the biological hijack, the loss of rational function, can be modified through deliberate practice. The neural pathways that currently send you spiraling under pressure can be redirected. New pathways can be built. Better responses can become automatic. The Stoics understood this long before neuroscience could explain it. Marcus Aurelius didn't wake up one morning naturally immune to pressure. He practiced. Every day, he wrote down his thoughts, examined his responses, challenged his assumptions, and deliberately worked to build a mind that could govern an empire without being governed by fear. That practice is available to you. It starts right now. The Stoic framework that transforms pressure into power. The ancient Stoics were not, as the popular misconception suggests, people who suppressed their emotions and felt nothing. They were something far more interesting and far more useful to you right now. They were people who refused to be controlled by circumstances they did not choose. Epictetus framed it as simply as it's ever been framed. There are things within your control and things outside your control. Everything within your control is your judgment, your response, your actions. Everything outside is noise. The Stoic project, the entire philosophical enterprise, was about learning to act decisively and excellently in the space you actually own, while releasing attachment to everything you don't. Apply that to pressure and it becomes transformational. When pressure hits, most people's attention floods outward. They focus on the audience, the stakes, the possible consequences, the opinions of others, the things that could go wrong. All of this is outside their control. And the more attention they pour into what they can't control, the less they have available for what they actually can. Champions reverse this entirely. The moment pressure increases, the best performers in any field, from special forces operators to Olympic athletes to leading neurosurgeons to the most effective trial lawyers in the country, narrow their focus to the controllable, not as a denial of reality, not as a pretense that the stakes don't matter, but as a deliberate, trained act of attention management. This is the first principle of the Stoic mindset. Control the controllable, completely and immediately. The second principle is just as powerful. Reframe what the moment means. Most people, when they step into a high-pressure situation, interpret it as a threat. Their mind runs threat detection software, and the system lights up red. But interpretation is not fixed. The same situation, the same physiological activation, the same external circumstances. The meaning of all of it is something you have extraordinary power over. A Stoic does not walk into the crucial moment thinking, "I hope I don't fail." A Stoic walks in thinking, "This is where I get to demonstrate what I've built." That's not denial. That's not performance positivity. That's a deliberate reframing that fundamentally changes your neurological response to the situation. When you interpret pressure as a test you're ready for, rather than a threat you might not survive, your body responds differently. The cortisol curve shifts. The prefrontal cortex stays engaged longer. You think more clearly. You communicate more effectively. You access the full depth of your preparation. The third principle is what separates the Stoics from every self-help framework you've ever encountered. Voluntary discomfort. Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. They all wrote about the importance of deliberately seeking difficulty, not because suffering is virtuous in itself, but because the mind that has never practiced under stress has no reference point for performing under stress. The soldier who has only trained in perfect conditions will break in the field. The executive who has only presented to friendly rooms will freeze in front of a hostile board. The Stoics practiced voluntary hardship as a form of preparation. They fasted not because they had to, but to prove to themselves they could manage scarcity. They slept on hard surfaces sometimes, not out of asceticism, but to build a kind of mental toughness that comfort erodes. They rehearsed their worst-case scenarios in vivid detail, a practice they called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, not to court disaster, but to remove its power to surprise them. When you've already faced your worst case in your imagination, with your rational mind fully engaged, it cannot ambush you in reality. This connects directly to how modern high performers prepare. A pilot who has logged hundreds of hours in a flight simulator isn't surprised by system failures. A ER physician who has done crisis simulation training doesn't freeze when a patient codes. A professional investor who has thought through multiple market collapse scenarios doesn't panic when volatility spikes. The preparation is the power. There's a fourth Stoic principle that becomes critical in pressure moments, and it's perhaps the most counterintuitive. Amor fati, the love of fate. Not passive resignation, but active acceptance. The acceptance that this moment, exactly as it is, with all its difficulty and uncertainty, is exactly what you have to work with. Not the moment you wish you had. Not the conditions you deserved. This moment, when a Chicago-based emergency room director walks into a mass casualty event, she doesn't stand in the door wishing there weren't so many patients, wishing she had more staff, wishing the circumstances were different. She accepts what is, completely and immediately, and then she acts with everything she has. The acceptance isn't defeat, it's what clears the channel between her and her full capability. The Stoic mindset doesn't make pressure disappear. It makes you someone who uses it, someone who steps into high-stakes moments with a kind of quiet readiness that others mistake for natural confidence. It's not natural. It's built. And the building process and the step-by-step construction of this mindset is exactly what the rest of this book is about. Here's what you need to start doing immediately. The next time you feel pressure building, before a difficult conversation, before a high-stakes presentation, before a moment that matters, pause, just 2 seconds, and ask yourself one question. What is actually within my control right now? Then put every ounce of your attention there. That's the beginning, and it changes everything. Train your thinking before the pressure arrives. Here's something that nobody talks about enough. The training has to happen before the moment. By the time you're standing in the fire, it's too late to learn how to resist burning. The techniques, the frameworks, the mental patterns, all of it needs to be so deeply ingrained that it operates automatically, not because you're lucky, not because you were born this way, because you practiced. The ancient Stoics called it ascesis, disciplined practice, not occasional effort. Not reading philosophy on weekends and hoping it sticks. Systematic, daily, deliberate practice of the mind. In modern terms, this looks like cognitive training, and it's more specific than most people realize. The first and most critical skill to train is metacognition, the ability to observe your own thinking while it's happening. Most people under pressure are completely inside their thoughts. They're not watching the thought patterns. They're lost in them. The thought I might fail this isn't observed as a thought. It's experienced as reality. The ability to step back, even slightly, even briefly, and observe your own mind from a kind of internal distance is the foundation of everything else. It's what allows you to notice a catastrophizing thought before it becomes a catastrophizing spiral. It's what allows you to catch your amygdala hijacking your prefrontal cortex and make an active choice about how to respond. How do you build this? The same way you build any cognitive skill, through practice in low-stakes environments. Start with a simple daily exercise. Spend 5 minutes each morning sitting quietly and observing your thoughts without engaging them. Don't chase them. Don't analyze them. Just watch them arise and pass. Label them simply planning thought, worry thought, memory. This isn't meditation as a spiritual practice. It's cognitive awareness training. And the research on its impact on stress response is extensive and compelling. A study published in the journal Psychological Science found that brief mindfulness training, as little as 2 weeks of consistent practice, measurably reduced cortisol reactivity to stress. The participants didn't feel less stress. They processed it differently. That's the goal. The second critical cognitive skill to train is reappraisal, the ability to consciously shift the meaning you assign to a situation. This isn't about lying to yourself. It's about recognizing that interpretation is always a choice, and that the interpretation most people make by default, "This is a threat I might not survive," is not the only available option. Practice this deliberately. Take a recent moment of pressure, something from the last week that activated your stress response, and write out 3 alternative interpretations of it. Not necessarily positive ones, just different ones. This situation revealed a gap in my preparation. This moment showed me exactly what I need to develop. This challenge created information I couldn't have gotten any other way. Reappraisal is not spin. It's the recognition that reality is more complex than your first interpretation, and that the interpretation you choose to act on determines your response. Elite performers do this automatically because they've practiced it until it's reflex. The third skill is what psychologists call attentional control, the ability to direct your focus deliberately, rather than having it commandeered by whatever is loudest or most frightening. Under pressure, attention behaves like a panicked crowd, trying to squeeze through a single doorway. It wants to go everywhere at once, which means it's effectively nowhere. Training attentional control means building the capacity to choose your focal point and hold it, even when competing signals are demanding your awareness. You build this through progressively difficult focus training. Start with 2-minute sessions of sustained single-point attention. A candle flame, a specific sound, the feeling of your breath. When your attention drifts, and it will constantly at first, return it without frustration. The return is the rep. The return is where the training actually happens. Then progressively increase difficulty. 2 minutes becomes 5. Quiet environments become noisy ones. Single distractions become multiple competing demands. This is the cognitive equivalent of adding weight to a barbell. Progressive overload for your attention muscle. There's a fourth cognitive skill that deserves particular attention here because it's especially relevant to the high-pressure professional environments most people navigate today. Decision-making under ambiguity. Most pressure situations don't come with complete information. The market is moving in ways you don't fully understand. The client's objection reveals something you didn't anticipate. The project has complications that weren't in the brief. The unprepared mind freezes in ambiguity because it's waiting for certainty before it can act. But certainty in most high-pressure situations never fully arrives. The trained Stoic mind operates differently. It makes decisions with the information available, acts decisively, and remains genuinely open to adjusting as new information emerges. It's not reckless. It's decisive. And decisiveness in ambiguity is a trainable skill. Practice it daily with low-stakes decisions. Stop deliberating excessively over things that don't actually require extended analysis. Make faster calls. Commit to them. Evaluate. Adjust. This builds what researchers call decision velocity, the ability to move from information to action without paralysis. The Stoics also understood something profoundly practical about cognitive training: the importance of evening reflection. Marcus Aurelius didn't just philosophize in the abstract. He reviewed his day. What had he done well? Where had his thinking been unclear or reactive? What could be corrected tomorrow? This daily audit of your own mental performance is what creates compound improvement over time. Here's a version you can implement tonight. Take 10 minutes before you sleep. Review the moments of the day where you felt pressure. What thought patterns arose? Were they accurate? Were they helpful? What would a clearer response have looked like? You're not beating yourself up. You're auditing the system. Each audit makes the next performance better. The ancient Stoics built these practices into the architecture of their daily lives. The result was minds that could operate under conditions that would have broken most people around them. The question is not whether this training works. The evidence, philosophical, psychological, and neurological, is overwhelming that it does. The question is whether you're willing to actually do it. Build the pressure routine that keeps you grounded. Let's talk about what actually happens in your mind and body in the 60 seconds before a high-pressure moment. Your heart rate is climbing. Your breathing has become shallower without you noticing it. Muscle tension is increasing across your shoulders and jaw. Your thoughts are starting to accelerate. Fragments of scenarios, both good and bad, flashing through your consciousness like a slot machine spinning. Most people experience all of this and add one more layer of suffering on top of it. They resist it. They fight the activation. They tell themselves they shouldn't feel this way. They try to think their way out of a physiological state through sheer willpower. This makes everything worse. The pressure routine is the antidote, not a collection of feel-good rituals, not superstition, a set of specific, deliberately designed, consistently practiced techniques that shift your nervous system from reactive mode to performance mode. And here is the critical distinction. It shifts you, not by eliminating the activation, but by channeling it. Let's build yours. The foundation is breathing, not vague advice to breathe deeply, a specific pattern with documented neurological effects. The technique most thoroughly validated for performance under stress is called tactical breathing, originally developed for military and law enforcement applications. The pattern is straightforward. Inhale through your nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Exhale through your mouth for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Repeat this cycle 4 to 6 times. What this does to your nervous system is measurable. The extended exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's brake system. It reduces heart rate variability in a way that actually improves cognitive function under stress. The hold phases give the nervous system a moment to regulate. Within 60 to 90 seconds of consistent tactical breathing, most people experience a measurable shift in clarity. But here's what most guides on breathing leave out. The breathing technique only works reliably if you've practiced it in low-pressure contexts dozens of times before you need it in high-pressure ones. If the first time you try to use it is during a crisis, your system won't recognize it as an anchor. Practice it before you drive to work. Practice it before meals. Practice it during your evening walk. Wire the pattern into your nervous system in calm states so it's available automatically in activated ones. The second component of your pressure routine is physical grounding, a specific body posture or movement sequence that signals to your nervous system that you're stable and ready. Research from social psychologist Amy Cuddy and subsequent researchers has explored how body posture affects hormonal states and performance. Regardless of the ongoing debate about specific effect sizes, the core insight holds. How you hold your body sends signals to your brain. Collapsed posture signals threat. Open, tall, grounded posture signals readiness. Build a specific physical stance into your routine. Shoulders back and down, not military rigid, but open. Feet planted at shoulder width. Head level, jaw relaxed. This takes about 3 seconds to assume and shifts your physiological state measurably. It becomes, through practice, a trigger for performance readiness. The third component is a mental anchor, a specific thought, image, or phrase that your mind has been conditioned to associate with clarity and capability. This works through a principle called associative conditioning. A well-known example: the smell of a specific cologne or perfume can instantly transport you back to a specific memory. Your brain has wired that sensory input to that experience. You can deliberately create the same kind of association between a chosen mental anchor and a peak performance state. The way to build this anchor is through visualization during high performance states. When you're in your training, practicing, thinking clearly, operating at your best, practice deliberately calling up your anchor, a specific phrase, a particular image, a brief memory of a time you performed excellently under pressure. Repeat this consistently. The anchor becomes wired to the performance state. Under pressure, calling up the anchor activates the associated state. Some of the most effective pressure anchors are specific and personal. For one executive at a logistics company in Dallas, it was a single sentence: "I've been here before and I handled it." For a trial attorney in Atlanta, it was the visual image of a specific mentor watching with quiet confidence. For a competitive cyclist training for national championships, it was the feeling of the last strong climb she'd completed. Not the memory of it, the felt sense of it. Yours needs to be yours. It needs to resonate. It needs to be rooted in real experience. And it needs to be practiced. The fourth component of an effective pressure routine is what I call a consequence reset. A specific mental move that separates you from the weight of what's at stake long enough for you to actually perform. Here's the paradox of high-stakes situations. The more you think about the consequences, the less effectively you execute, which makes bad consequences more likely. But the consequences are real. Ignoring them completely isn't honest or useful. The consequence reset doesn't ask you to pretend the stakes are low. It asks you to park them deliberately. The technique works like this. In the moment before the pressure moment begins, you make a deliberate internal acknowledgement. This matters. The stakes are real. And right now, the only thing I can do about them is perform excellently in the next few minutes. So that's where my attention goes. It's a handshake with reality followed by a deliberate redirection of attention. Not denial. Acknowledgement and redirection. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations about a version of this: the recognition that any given moment, no matter how significant it seems, is simply a moment. One event in an enormous sequence, neither the beginning nor the end of anything. This perspective doesn't diminish the importance of the moment. It relieves it of enough psychological weight that you can actually function within it. The final component of your pressure routine is a performance intention, a clear, brief statement of how you intend to show up in the next few minutes. Not what outcome you want, how you intend to perform. I will stay present with each question and answer from what I actually know. I will listen fully before I respond. I will make bold decisions with the information I have. I will communicate clearly, even when I'm uncertain. The intention focuses your attention forward and onto the controllable. It's the last thought you have before you walk into the room, before you pick up the phone, before the clock starts. Practice this entire routine together, in sequence, in low-pressure situations, before important but not critical calls, before challenging workouts, before difficult conversations with people you trust. The routine becomes more powerful the more consistently it's applied. Eventually, and this is what you're working toward, running through the routine takes less than 90 seconds and reliably shifts you from reactive to ready. Master the present moment. When everything is at stake, Here's the thing about pressure that nobody wants to admit. Most of the suffering it causes isn't actually happening in the present. It's happening in the future you're catastrophizing about, or the past failure you're replaying, or the imaginary audience you're performing for in your head. The actual present moment, the question being asked right now, the meeting happening right now, the challenge unfolding right now, that's usually manageable. It's everything else the mind adds to it that makes it overwhelming. This is where the Stoics were extraordinarily ahead of their time. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." Epictetus returned again and again to the idea that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. They weren't offering comfort. They were offering a tactical insight. The present moment is where your power actually lives. Return to it. Modern neuroscience has caught up to what the Stoics intuited. The default mode network, the brain circuitry that activates when you're not focused on an immediate task, is associated with mind-wandering, rumination, and projection into past and future. Under stress, the default mode network can become hyperactive, pulling your attention relentlessly into the territory of what might go wrong, what went wrong before, what others will think. Skilled performers across domains have one thing in common. They've developed the ability to suppress this network under pressure and maintain task-focused attention on the present moment. How do you build this? The first practice is sensory anchoring. Under pressure, when your mind starts time traveling, you deliberately return it to immediate sensory experience. What do you hear right now specifically? Not noise. What exact sound? The hum of a specific frequency. The way the air conditioning shutter cycles. The slight ambient sound of the room. Getting granular with sensory detail pulls the mind out of abstraction and into the present. It's impossible to be fully engaged with an immediate sensory detail and simultaneously catastrophizing about the future. They use different cognitive resources. Build the habit of sensory anchoring in ordinary moments. Walking down the street, deliberately engage with specific sensory details. What does the ground feel like under your feet? Not hard. What specific texture, temperature give? This trains the neural pathway between your intention to be present and your actual present moment engagement. Under pressure, that pathway becomes your lifeline back to clarity. The second practice is micro-task focus, the discipline of breaking any overwhelming challenge into the smallest possible present moment action and focusing entirely on that. A surgeon doesn't think about closing the patient while making the first incision. An aircraft carrier pilot approaching the deck doesn't think about parking the plane. She thinks about lineup, glide slope, and power in this moment. On this approach, a quarterback with 3 seconds in the pocket doesn't think about the final score. He sees the coverage, finds the window, throws. This isn't compartmentalization in the psychological defense sense. It's tactical attention management. You don't ignore the big picture. You've already accounted for it in your preparation. Now, in the moment of execution, you zoom all the way into the smallest actionable unit in front of you. Practice this in your daily work. When you feel overwhelmed by a large project, stop thinking about the project. Find the smallest possible next action and do only that. This trains your brain to tolerate the discomfort of not seeing the whole picture, while still moving forward effectively. The third practice is thought labeling under stress. When pressure-driven thoughts arise, the catastrophizing, the self-doubt, the imagined judgments of others, you learn to label them without engaging them. That's an anxiety thought. That's a projection thought. That's a worst-case scenario my brain is generating. The label creates distance. You become the observer of the thought rather than the thinker caught inside it, And from that small distance, you can choose. You can let the thought pass without following it. You can return your attention to the present task. The neuroscience here is compelling. Research by Matthew Lieberman at UCLA found that labeling emotional experiences, putting feelings into words, measurably reduces amygdala activation and increases prefrontal cortex engagement. In other words, the simple act of naming what's happening in your mind shifts processing from the reactive emotional system to the rational thinking system. You are literally, through the act of naming your thought, moving your brain toward better thinking. The fourth practice is process language, the discipline of thinking and self-talking in process terms rather than outcome terms while performing. The difference looks like this. Outcome language. I need to win this negotiation. I can't mess this up. They have to say yes. Process language. Listen to what they're actually saying. Find the real objection beneath the stated one. Respond to what's present, not what I feared. Outcome language pulls your attention into a future that hasn't happened. Process language keeps it in the present action. And in the present action, everything that matters is controllable. High-performing trial attorneys, for example, don't think during closing argument about whether they'll win. They think about this sentence, this jury member's expression, this pause, this inflection. The outcome is determined by how well they execute the process. And the process is only ever happening right now. The fifth and most advanced practice is what I'm going to call pressure presence. Learning to use the intensity of a high-stakes moment, not as something that pulls you away from the present, but as something that drives you into it. The heightened physiological state that pressure creates, the elevated heart rate, the sharpened senses, the increased energy, is actually a more vivid form of present moment experience. Your senses are more acute. Details you'd normally miss become visible. Time sometimes feels like it slows down. Athletes describe this as being in the zone. Performers describe it as being fully alive. What they're actually describing is a state of extreme present moment engagement where the usual chatter of the mind falls away. Because the intensity of the moment commands complete attention, this state can be cultivated. It becomes more accessible the more you practice present moment awareness in lower pressure situations, and the training feedback loop is powerful. The more consistently you return to the present under pressure, the more you discover that the present is exactly where your capability lives. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The pressure is not blocking your access to your best performance. It's the path to it. Use pressure as fuel instead of letting it drain you. Stop thinking about pressure as something that happens to you. Start thinking about it as something you happen with. This is not a semantic game. It's a fundamental shift in the relationship between you and one of the most potent forces you'll encounter in a high-performance life. And getting this shift right, genuinely, not just intellectually, changes everything about how you perform when everything is on the line. Let's start with the physiology, because understanding what your body is actually doing under pressure changes how you interpret what it's doing. When a stressful situation arises, your sympathetic nervous system activates. Adrenaline and noradrenaline flood your system. Your heart rate increases. Glucose is mobilized for energy. Your immune response temporarily sharpens. Your visual focus narrows. Your reaction time decreases. Your muscles prime for fast, powerful action. This is not your body undermining you. This is your body preparing you to perform at a level beyond what's available to you in a resting state. A groundbreaking study by Stanford psychologist Elia Kroom found that the impact of stress on performance and health is dramatically shaped by the belief about stress not just the stress itself. People who understood stress as enhancing, who interpreted their physiological activation as their body preparing them to rise to a challenge, showed better cognitive function, better cardiovascular markers, and better performance under pressure than people who interpreted the same activation as threat. Same stress, same physiology, completely different outcomes based on interpretation. The Stoics called this apatheia, not the modern English word apathy, but the original concept of freedom from being controlled by external events. The Stoic didn't feel nothing. The Stoic was not controlled by what he felt. He experienced the activation fully and chose his response deliberately. That's the first practical shift. Reinterpret the activation signals. When your heart starts racing before a critical presentation, instead of "I'm nervous," try "My body is mobilizing." When your hands feel slightly unsteady before an important conversation, instead of "I'm anxious," try "I'm activated and ready." This is not denial. The sensations are real, but the label you attach to them and the story that label generates is under your control. You will resist this at first. It will feel artificial. That's because you've been automatically labeling these sensations as anxiety for years, maybe decades. The default interpretation is deeply wired. Rewiring it takes deliberate practice consistently applied. Here's how you practice it. In the next week, every time you notice stress activation, elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, muscle tension, pause for 2 seconds and deliberately reframe. Say it internally. My system is mobilizing. This is preparation. Do this every time, even in trivial situations, even in the coffee line when you're running late. Wire the new interpretation into the response so it's available automatically when it counts. The second practice for using pressure as fuel is energy direction. The deliberate channeling of activated energy towards specific performance outputs, rather than letting it scatter into generalized anxiety. An activated state is characterized by excess energy. If that energy has nowhere to go, if you're sitting in a chair trying to look calm while internally your nervous system is in fourth gear, it creates a painful mismatch. The energy wants to be used. Containment increases the discomfort. Elite performers learn to direct this energy. A professional basketball player bouncing on the balls of his feet in the tunnel before a playoff game isn't nervous. He's channeling. An entrepreneur pacing before an investor pitch isn't falling apart. He's directing. A concert pianist running through passages in her mind backstage isn't doubting herself. She's focusing the energy toward the instrument she's about to touch. Find your channel. What's the immediate performance task that needs the energy? Direct it there, not through suppression of the activation, but through purposeful application of it. The third practice is what I call pressure pursuit, the deliberate habit of seeking out high-pressure situations, specifically because you know they enhance your development. Most people avoid pressure situations whenever possible. They take the easier path. They delay the difficult conversation. They opt for the safer assignment. They stay in environments where they feel competent rather than challenged. The result is that when pressure finds them, and it always does, they're completely unprepared. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." This wasn't poetry. It was a practice instruction. Seek the friction, deliberately. In practical terms, this means volunteering for the high-stakes presentation instead of waiting to be assigned it. It means entering the competitive environment rather than the comfortable one. It means having the difficult conversation proactively, rather than waiting until conflict forces it. Each deliberate pressure exposure builds your capacity to channel the next one more effectively. This is progressive overload for your mental system. just as a muscle only grows through load that exceeds its current capacity. Your pressure management capability only develops through exposure to pressure that exceeds your comfort zone. The fourth practice is pre-performance activation, the deliberate ramping up of your physiological state before high-pressure moments, rather than trying to calm it down. This sounds counterintuitive to everything we've been told about managing nerves. But research on pre-performance interventions consistently shows that athletes and performers who deliberately increase their arousal before competition through music, movement, self-talk, tend to outperform those who attempt to reduce it through calming techniques. The reason is simple. You need to be activated to perform at your peak. Trying to calm yourself into a flat, low arousal state before a high-stakes performance is like trying to run a race at a walking pace. Your system needs to be in high gear. The goal is not to eliminate the activation, but to control its direction. Build a pre-performance activation practice. It might be a specific playlist, a particular movement sequence, a deliberate visualization of past peak performances, something that gets your system up and running, engaged and ready, and then your pressure routine channels that energy into focused performance. Pressure handled this way becomes a competitive advantage. While others around you are fighting their own physiology, spending precious cognitive resources trying to suppress the activation that could be fueling their performance, you're channeling it. You're moving with it instead of against it. And over time, you develop something the Stoics would recognize immediately. A kind of calm authority in the eye of the storm that others mistake for natural ease. It's not natural. It's practiced. And it's available to you. Develop bulletproof focus that never breaks. Under stress, here is the performance truth that separates the good from the exceptional. Under pressure, most people's focus scatters. The exceptional performer's focus sharpens. This is not a personality difference. It's a training difference. Attention is a limited resource. This is one of the most replicated findings in cognitive psychology. You cannot attend to everything simultaneously, and under pressure, the demands on your attention multiply dramatically. The stakes, the audience, the physical sensations, the internal commentary, the uncertainty, the consequences, all of it competes for the same finite cognitive bandwidth. Untrained attention gets hijacked. It gravitates toward whatever is most threatening, most novel, most emotionally charged, which, under pressure, tends to be everything except the actual task that needs your focus. Trained attention is different. It can be deliberately directed and held. It can recover from hijacking quickly and automatically. It has what researchers call attentional flexibility, the ability to shift between broad and narrow focus as the situation demands, without losing concentration overall. Let's talk about how to build it. The first training method is focused attention practice, the deliberate exercise of directing your attention to a single object and returning it every time it wanders. This is the cognitive equivalent of a bicep curl. Each return of wandering attention is one repetition. The more reps you complete over time, the stronger your attentional control becomes. Start with 3 minutes daily. Sit comfortably and focus on the physical sensation of breathing. Not the concept of breathing, the actual physical sensation. The slight rise of the chest, the movement of air through the nostrils, the expansion of the rib cage. When your mind wanders, and it will constantly, simply notice that it has wandered and return. No judgment, no frustration, just return. Do this every day. 3 minutes becomes 5. 5 becomes 10. After 2 months of daily practice, the research suggests measurable improvement in both sustained attention and recovery, speed after distraction. But here's the advanced move that most people miss. you need to practice attention control under increasing levels of difficulty. Quiet and comfortable is the starting point, not the destination. Progress your training. Practice focused attention while sitting in a busy coffee shop, while music is playing, while someone nearby is having a conversation, while you're physically uncomfortable, while under time pressure. The goal is to build attentional resilience, the ability to maintain focus despite environmental and internal interference. A concept worth understanding here is what attention researchers call directed attention fatigue. Just like a muscle, your attentional capacity can become exhausted through overuse without recovery. This is why, in extended pressure situations, a long negotiation, a multi-day trial, a sustained project crisis, performance often degrades in the later phases, even when the person started strong. Champions manage attentional stamina strategically. They understand that peak-focused attention is not sustainable continuously. They work in cycles, periods of intense, narrow focus, followed by deliberate, brief recovery. During a high-stakes negotiation, the best negotiators have learned to use bathroom breaks and coffee refills, not just for logistics, but as micro-recovery periods. Brief moments of reduced cognitive demand that restore attentional resources for the next critical exchange. Build this into your performance. In any extended high-pressure situation, identify the moments where intense focus is most critical. Conserve attention during lower stakes phases. Deploy it fully during peak demand phases. This is attentional pacing, and it's how championship-level performers maintain cognitive performance over time when others are fading. The second component of bulletproof focus is what I'll call distraction immunity. The trained ability to encounter competing stimuli without being pulled off your focal point. This is built through deliberate distraction training. You practice your performance skill while someone is actively trying to distract you. An elite debater practices arguments while an assistant introduces interruptions. A professional negotiator role-plays while coached to handle deliberate provocations from the other side. A surgeon trains in simulation environments designed to introduce unexpected complications. The distraction training accomplishes two things. First, it builds the attentional muscle through the specific kind of resistance it needs to be strong. Second, and this is psychologically powerful, it reduces the novelty of distraction. When you've practiced performing through active distraction, a distraction during actual performance doesn't feel catastrophic. It feels familiar. And familiar things don't hijack attention the way novel threats do. The third component is recovery speed. How quickly you can return to focused attention after losing it. You will lose focus under pressure. Even the most trained performers do. The difference between an Olympic-level focus practitioner and everyone else is not that they never get distracted. It's that they notice the distraction and return in 1 or 2 seconds rather than 10 or 20. That recovery speed is trainable. The key is developing a refocus trigger, a specific brief action that signals your attention to reset. It might be a breath, a physical touch of a specific point on your body, a single specific word said internally. Through consistent practice, this trigger becomes associated with attentional reset and executes automatically, rapidly, reliably. One note on the Stoic dimension of focus that's worth pausing on. The Stoics were profoundly suspicious of distraction as a way of life. Seneca wrote extensively about how most people allow their attention to be colonized by trivialities, by the opinions of others, by the noise of social life, and how this constant distraction impairs not just performance, but the quality of one's thinking and existence. The discipline of sustained, deliberate attention was, for the Stoics, not just a performance skill. It was a moral and philosophical one. To give your full attention to what genuinely matters and to resist the pull of everything that doesn't was an act of philosophical integrity. In a world designed to fragment your attention with notifications, feeds, constant digital interruption, the Stoic practice of deliberate, sustained focus has never been more urgently necessary. And the performance benefits have never been more differentiating. The person who can focus completely in a world of perpetual distraction has a competitive advantage that is genuinely rare. Build it deliberately, protect it fiercely. Train your body to support your mind under pressure. The mind and body are not separate systems that occasionally influence each other. They are a single integrated system, and under pressure, the state of one determines the capacity of the other. A body locked in tension sends continuous threat signals to the brain. A jaw clenched tight, shoulders drawn up toward the ears, shallow breath stuck in the upper chest. This is a physiological distress signal. The brain receives it and responds by maintaining or increasing its threat response state. The result is a feedback loop in which physical tension generates psychological tension, which generates more physical tension, and the whole system spirals away from performance capacity. Breaking this loop and doing it deliberately under pressure in real time is a physical skill that requires physical training. The target state is what performance scientists call optimal arousal. Not relaxed, not tense, but what you might visualize as a coiled readiness. Think of an elite sprinter in the blocks before the start. The body is activated, heart rate elevated, muscles primed, but there is no wasted tension. Every system is engaged, nothing is locked. This is calm alertness, the body equivalent of a cleared runway. The foundation of getting there is breath. We've talked about tactical breathing already as a mental tool. Here we're going to look at it as a physiological intervention. When you engage in slow, deliberate, diaphragmatic breathing, breathing that expands the belly rather than only the chest, you activate the vagus nerve, the primary pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system. The vagus nerve is essentially your body's calming circuit. Activating it doesn't make you sleepy or slow. It reduces cortisol and adrenaline just enough to bring your arousal back into the optimal zone. Activated but not overwhelmed. The specific technique that has the strongest physiological evidence is extended exhale breathing. Make your exhale longer than your inhale. Inhale for 4 counts. Exhale for 6 or 8. The asymmetry is what activates the vagal brake most effectively. Practice this until it's automatic. You want to be able to deploy it while simultaneously carrying on a conversation, or while walking into a difficult meeting, or while waiting for the call that changes everything. Body scan practice is the second physical training method. This involves systematically moving your attention through your body and consciously releasing tension wherever you find it. Most people under pressure are carrying significant, unnecessary tension in areas that have nothing to do with performance. Clenched jaw muscles, gripped hands, raised and forward shoulders, neck tension. This is energy being spent on threat responses that could be spent on performance. Build a rapid body scan into your pressure routine. 30 seconds. Start at your jaw. Consciously relax it. Your throat. Your shoulders. Roll them back and down once, then leave them there. Your hands. Open them, and then let them rest naturally. Your feet. Feel them make contact with the floor. This brief scan interrupts the tension accumulation that builds unconsciously and creates the physical conditions for clear thinking. The third practice is progressive stress exposure at the physical level. This is the practice of deliberately training in physically challenging states. When tired, when physically uncomfortable, when your body is giving you signals to stop. so that your performance skills remain accessible despite physical challenge. This is common in military training for an obvious reason. Combat doesn't schedule itself for when you're well rested and comfortable. But the principle applies to any high-stakes domain. A surgeon who has practiced only in ideal conditions will degrade in performance during the long, demanding cases. An executive who has practiced presentation skills only in comfortable settings may struggle when the room temperature is wrong, the technology fails, and she's been awake for 20 hours. Deliberately introducing physical challenge into your training conditions builds robustness into your performance system. There's one more physical practice worth extended attention here, because its impact on pressure performance is both dramatic and underutilized: cold exposure. Regular exposure to cold water, cold showers, cold plunge, even cold face washing, trains the nervous system in a specific and valuable way. The initial cold shock is, physiologically, a controlled stress response. Heart rate spikes. Breathing becomes involuntary and panicked. The system activates. And then, if you practice, you breathe through it. You find composure in the discomfort. You demonstrate to your nervous system that activation is survivable, that discomfort is not emergency, that you can maintain rational function while your system is activated. This transfers, not in some abstract way, but in a documented, physiologically explainable way. Regular cold exposure trains your nervous system's stress response to be less reactive and more recoverable. People who practice cold exposure consistently show faster heart rate recovery after stress events, better cortisol regulation, and measurably better performance on cognitive tasks conducted under pressure. The Stoics practiced versions of this deliberately. Seneca wrote about his own practice of cold baths, not for health fashion, but as a form of training the mind through the body. Movement under pressure is the final physical skill to develop. Under high stress, many people's movement becomes stilted, rigid, mechanical. Their natural physical fluency, the ease of gesture, the relaxed quality of motion, gets compressed by tension. Training your movement patterns to remain fluid under activation is a specific skill. Athletes train this through game speed practice. Speakers train it through high-stakes simulated presentations. Executives train it through role play that deliberately escalates tension. Find the version relevant to your domain and practice your physical performance at high intensity until your movement remains natural and effective even when your system is activated. This isn't just about looking composed. It's about removing the physical bottleneck between your intention and your execution. Your body is the platform your mind operates on. Train it accordingly. Handle mistakes without letting them destroy your performance. Here is something that champions know and that most people have never truly internalized. Mistakes are not evidence that you can't handle pressure. They are evidence that you're inside a complex, high-stakes situation that nobody navigates perfectly. The difference sounds subtle. The performance impact is enormous. Most people's relationship with mistakes under pressure is catastrophically unproductive. A mistake becomes an event that their attention grabs onto, examines with furious intensity, attaches narratives of inadequacy to, and carries forward into subsequent performance as a weight that makes the next moment harder, which creates the next mistake, which adds more weight, until what started as a single error has compounded into a performance collapse. The technical term for this in performance psychology is error cascading. And it's almost never caused by the initial mistake. It's caused by the response to the mistake. The Stoics had a clear framework for this, and it's more sophisticated than it might first appear. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. The translation into performance psychology. The imperfect reality in front of you is reality. Work with it. When you make a mistake, your Stoic response is this: accept it completely, extract any available information from it, and release it. Not suppress it, not ignore it. Accept it, which is different. Acceptance means looking directly at what happened without the additional layer of judgment, shame, and narrative. I missed that signal. I misjudged that timing. I didn't execute that technique correctly. These are neutral observations. They contain useful information, and then they're gone. The next moment gets your full attention. This is what performance coaches call mistake flushing, and it's one of the most consistently documented characteristics of elite performers across domains. The best tennis players in the world shake off missed shots within seconds. The best quarterbacks in the NFL have a quarter-field short memory. Whatever happened on the last play is gone before they're back at the line. The most effective ER physicians don't carry the weight of each case into the next one. They're not cold. They're not in denial. They have trained themselves to release mistakes rapidly because they understand that the person treating the current patient, or executing the current play, or navigating the current challenge deserves their full, uncontaminated attention. How do you build this skill? First, practice mistake normalization in training. Deliberately make mistakes. In simulations, in practice, in low-stakes contexts. Not carelessly, but intentionally. Make the error, execute your recovery protocol, and continue. Make mistake and recovery a normal part of your performance cycle, rather than an exceptional, emotionally charged event. When mistakes are familiar, when your system has experienced them and recovered from them hundreds of times in training, they lose their power to derail you in performance. The nervous system doesn't sound the full alarm because it recognizes this is something we've dealt with before and recovered from. This is not an emergency. Second, develop a specific physical reset ritual for use after mistakes. Something brief, concrete, physical. A single breath and a slow exhale. Touching a specific point on your wrist, rolling your shoulders once. The physical action serves two purposes. It gives the mistake response something to do, a specific, brief, contained action, and through conditioning, it signals the system to release and refocus. Practice this ritual every single time you make a mistake in training. Every missed shot, every stumbled word, every suboptimal decision. Same ritual, every time. After hundreds of repetitions, the ritual becomes automatic. It fires instantly and reliably in the moments when you most need it. Third, and this is the Stoic practice at its clearest, conduct your mistake analysis at the right time, not in the middle of performance. The middle of performance is not the time for analysis. During performance, the mistake gets flushed and you return to execution. After performance, in the calm, reflective space of the evening review, you examine it with full attention. What actually happened? What information does it contain? What adjustment does it suggest? What specific practice would address it? This separation of execution mode from analysis mode is one of the highest leverage practices in performance development. When you try to analyze in the middle of execution, you're dividing your attention at the exact moment it should be unified. When you systematically analyze after execution, you extract every useful piece of information from the mistake without letting it poison the performance. The Stoics' evening review, examining the day's events with clear eyes and a commitment to learning, was precisely this practice. Not self-flagellation, not self-satisfaction. Clear, honest examination in the service of improvement. There's a deeper point here that's worth sitting with for a moment. The anxiety about making mistakes, the fear that a mistake will expose inadequacy, will prove you don't belong, will permanently damage your reputation, is almost always disproportionate to the actual consequences of the mistake. A mistake in a presentation rarely derails a career. A missed question in an interview rarely costs a job. A bad quarter rarely ends a business. The catastrophized version of the consequence lives in the imagination. The actual consequence, when it arrives, is almost always more manageable than feared. The Stoics practiced something they called negative visualization, deliberately imagining difficult outcomes to reduce their power. Not to invite them, but to see clearly that even the difficult outcomes are survivable and often instructive. When you've genuinely faced the possibility of the mistake's worst consequences and made peace with your ability to handle them, the fear of the mistake loses its stranglehold on your performance. Make mistakes. Learn from them immediately after, not during. Release them within seconds. Perform the next moment clean. This is the standard you're working toward. It's achievable, and it starts with the very next mistake you make. Build mental stamina that lasts through extended pressure. Sprinting is not the same as distance running. Short bursts of pressure performance are not the same as sustained performance across hours, days, or weeks of high-stakes intensity. And most people, even those who can perform brilliantly in a single high-pressure moment, have never trained their minds for extended endurance. This is why so many critical failures happen late. The surgeon who is flawless for the first 3 hours and makes the critical error in hour 5. The executive who navigates the first 2 weeks of a corporate crisis masterfully and makes the disastrous decision on day 14. The attorney who prepares brilliantly for 3 weeks and shows up diminished on the day of trial. Mental fatigue is real, it's measurable, and it's insidious because unlike physical fatigue, it doesn't always announce itself clearly. You don't feel mental fatigue the way you feel a cramping muscle. Often you feel roughly normal, while your decision quality, your impulse control, your emotional regulation, and your attentional precision are all quietly degrading. Understanding mental fatigue is the first step toward managing it strategically. The prefrontal cortex, the brain region most responsible for rational decision-making, impulse control, and emotional regulation, is extraordinarily energy-intensive. It runs on glucose and requires substantial recovery time. Every high-stakes decision you make, every moment of effortful self-control, every sustained focus session draws on the same limited pool of cognitive resources. Research by Roy Baumeister and colleagues established what's known as the ego depletion model. Willpower and cognitive control function like a resource that gets used up. More recent research has complicated this picture, but the core practical insight holds. Extended high-demand cognitive performance degrades quality over time, and strategic recovery is the primary countermeasure. Champions understand this and plan accordingly. The first strategic approach is cognitive load management, the deliberate reduction of unnecessary mental demands, especially before and during high-stakes extended periods. This is why high-performing leaders, the ones who have thought seriously about their own performance, standardize as many routine decisions as possible. Steve Jobs' unchanging wardrobe, Barack Obama's commitment to the same decision-making process, regardless of the magnitude of the choice. Warren Buffett's decades-long daily routines. These are not quirks. They're cognitive resource management strategies. Every decision you don't have to make is cognitive capacity you've preserved for the decisions that actually matter. In the days before your most demanding professional challenges, minimize unnecessary choices. Simplify. Standardize. Reserve your mental resources for what genuinely requires them. The second approach is strategic micro-recovery. the deliberate insertion of brief recovery periods within extended pressure phases. Research on cognitive recovery suggests that even 5 to 10 minutes of genuine mental rest, not switching to a different demanding task, but actual rest, can restore a meaningful portion of depleted attentional resources. The key word is genuine. Checking your phone is not rest. A quick email scan is not rest. Rest means stepping away from cognitive demand. A short walk outdoors, a few minutes of quiet breathing, a brief period of unfocused awareness. Elite performers build these micro-recoveries into extended performance situations with the same intentionality they bring to peak performance phases. During a multi-day negotiation, the best performers schedule recovery deliberately. During a long surgery, experienced teams identify natural pauses and use them specifically for cognitive restoration, not casual conversation. Build this into your approach to any extended high-pressure situation. Identify the natural transition points. Protect them for recovery. Treat cognitive restoration with the same strategic seriousness as performance preparation. The third approach is sleep architecture for sustained pressure. This is the one that most high-achieving people consistently under-prioritize, often while telling themselves that it's a sign of their commitment and resilience. It isn't. Chronic sleep deprivation, even the moderate, functional sleep deprivation of getting 6 hours instead of the 7 or 8 most adults need, has documented effects on exactly the cognitive functions most critical under pressure: emotional regulation, risk assessment, working memory capacity, and impulse control. It also measurably increases cortisol reactivity, which means that sleep-deprived people experience more intense stress responses to the same stressors than their well-rested counterparts. Before extended high-stakes periods, sleep banking, getting extra sleep in the days prior, has demonstrable protective effects against subsequent performance degradation. After high-stakes periods, prioritizing recovery sleep should be treated as a performance strategy, not a luxury. The Stoics understood this in their own framework. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about beginning each day with intention and reflection, which implies the rest that makes those practices possible. Seneca warned against the kind of frantic, sleep-depriving productivity that produces the appearance of effort without the substance of results. The fourth approach is mental pacing, the deliberate calibration of cognitive intensity to the demands of each phase within an extended pressure situation. Not every moment of a multi-day crisis requires maximum cognitive output. There are phases that demand analytical precision, phases that require relationship management, phases that involve information gathering, and phases that are fundamentally administrative. The untrained performer tries to maintain maximum intensity throughout all of them, which is unsustainable and unnecessary. The trained performer maps the extended situation's demands and matches their cognitive intensity accordingly. Maximum engagement during the highest leverage decision points. Lower but still effective engagement during lower stakes phases. This is mental pacing. The distance runner's approach applied to cognitive performance. The fifth approach is nutritional and hydration strategy for cognitive performance. This is frequently dismissed as too mundane to be worth taking seriously. It is not. The brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's total energy, despite being only 2% of its mass. It is extraordinarily sensitive to glucose availability and hydration status. Even mild dehydration, 1 to 2% of body weight, measurably impairs attention, working memory, and reaction time. Blood sugar crashes produce cognitive fatigue and emotional reactivity that can be mistaken for mental weakness but are actually physiological states. In extended high-pressure situations, eating regular, moderate meals that sustain stable blood glucose, rather than skipping meals and then compensating with large ones, maintains more consistent cognitive performance. Staying consistently well hydrated is so impactful and so simple that it's almost embarrassing how often high performers neglect it during intense periods. These are not complex or exotic interventions. They're basic physiological maintenance for the organ you depend on most. Execute them with the same intentionality you bring to the sophisticated performance strategies in the rest of this book. Create unshakable confidence that grows stronger. Under pressure. Most people's confidence is fragile in exactly the wrong way. It's high when they're winning, comfortable, performing in familiar territory with a forgiving audience. It's low, often devastatingly low, when they're losing, uncomfortable, performing under pressure with high stakes and a critical audience. This is exactly backwards from what you need. And it's fixable. The Stoics had a word for the quality we're building here, arete, often translated as virtue, but more precisely meaning excellence in the full exercise of one's capabilities. Arete wasn't contingent on outcome. A Stoic general who fought brilliantly and lost the battle with courage and clear judgment had exercised arete. The outcome didn't define the quality of the action. This distinction between confidence rooted in outcome and confidence rooted in process and character is the foundational shift we need to make. Fragile confidence is outcome dependent. When you win, you feel capable. When you lose, you feel inadequate. The problem is that outcomes in complex, competitive environments are never fully within your control. You can do everything right and still lose. You can perform at your absolute best and still face circumstances that defeat you. Building your confidence on outcomes is like building a house on sand. The inevitable variability of results will continuously undermine the structure. Unshakable confidence is process-dependent and character-dependent. It's rooted in, I know how I prepared. I know the quality of my thinking. I know my character when it's tested. I know that I can handle whatever happens because I've built that capability. None of this is contingent on the score at the end. This is not a lower standard. It's a higher and more accurate one. Because the genuine confidence that comes from knowing the quality of your preparation and the resilience of your character is far more stable than anything that depends on today's result going your way. How do you build this? The first practice is evidence-based confidence accumulation, the deliberate, systematic collection of evidence that you perform under pressure. Most people's confidence is based on an unconscious, biased accounting of their own history. They weight recent failures heavily, discount past successes, and generally construct a narrative that underestimates their actual capability. This isn't honesty. It's negativity bias operating unchecked. The antidote is intentional. Keep an actual record, written, specific, detailed, of moments when you performed well under pressure, not just your best. Performances, every moment of genuine capability, the time you maintained composure in a difficult conversation, the presentation that went better than you feared, the crisis you navigated effectively, the mistake you recovered from quickly and cleanly. Review this record regularly, especially before high-pressure situations. The research on self-efficacy, the technical term for confidence in your specific ability to perform a specific task, shows clearly that reviewing your own history of successful performance is one of the most effective ways to increase it before a challenge. The second practice is preparation confidence. The direct relationship between the thoroughness of your preparation and your justified belief in your readiness. There are no shortcuts here. The confidence that comes from knowing you have genuinely prepared, rehearsed, anticipated, stress-tested your thinking, built your skills to the required level, is qualitatively different from the bravado that tries to substitute for preparation. One is a real resource you can draw on. The other is a performance that collapses the moment real pressure arrives. Prepare beyond what you think is necessary. When you walk into a high-stakes situation and you know you've prepared more thoroughly than any reasonable person would expect, when you've stress-tested your thinking against the hardest possible objections, when you've rehearsed your skills in conditions more difficult than the real situation, the confidence this generates is genuine and deep, not arrogance, readiness. The third practice is identity-level confidence, the cultivation of a self-concept that includes performs well under pressure as a defining characteristic. This may sound like a small thing. It isn't. The research on self-concept and behavior is extensive and clear. We consistently act in ways that align with our sense of who we are. People who identify as being bad under pressure tend to be bad under pressure, not because the identity is accurate, but because it shapes their interpretation of their own experience, their preparation choices, and their responses in the moment. Build the opposite identity deliberately, not through false affirmation, but through the accumulation of evidence and the deliberate interpretation of that evidence. Every time you handle a pressure moment well, even a small one, mark it. This is who I am. Someone who performs under pressure. Every time you recover quickly from a mistake, mark it. This is who I am. Someone with resilience and composure. Identity is constructed, and you have more agency in that construction than most people ever exercise. The fourth practice is pressure-tested confidence, the kind that can only come from actually having performed under pressure and survived, grown and succeeded. This is why exposure matters so much. Every time you deliberately enter a high-pressure situation and navigate it, not necessarily perfectly, but effectively, your confidence in your ability to handle the next one grows. Each exposure is a deposit in the confidence account that earns compound interest. Seek situations where you will be genuinely tested, not recklessly, not without preparation, but deliberately and progressively. Present to increasingly large audiences. Negotiate increasingly significant deals. Take on increasingly challenging projects. Compete at increasingly high levels. Each step builds the confidence that the next step is manageable. The Stoics called this ascesis, the deliberate exercise of one's capabilities in increasingly demanding conditions, not for the ego gratification of achievement, but for the genuine development of character and capacity. This is what unshakable confidence actually looks like. Quiet, deep, genuine, and independent of today's outcome. It's the confidence of someone who knows their own preparation, trusts their own character, and has sufficient evidence from their own history that they can handle what's coming. It doesn't disappear when the situation gets hard. It deepens. Learn from pressure. Failures to become mentally bulletproof. The single greatest accelerant of pressure mastery is not success under pressure. It's failure under pressure. Specifically, the deliberate, systematic extraction of every available lesson from every pressure failure you experience. This requires a fundamental reframe that most people resist because it feels risky. Failure under pressure is not a verdict on your capability. It is a diagnostic of your current state of preparation. The distinction matters enormously. A verdict is final. A diagnostic is information. And information is power. The Stoics were extraordinary on this point. Marcus Aurelius wrote about how every obstacle encountered is an opportunity to exercise a virtue, patience, courage, clarity, justice. The obstacle is not separate from the development. The obstacle is the development. A life without adversity, from the Stoic perspective, is a life without the friction necessary for growth. Applied to pressure failure, the failed presentation didn't just reveal a weakness. It provided a specific, precise, practical map of exactly where your preparation, your technique, or your mental game needs work. This is valuable. This is, in fact, irreplaceable. You cannot get this map from success. Success confirms what's already working. Failure shows you what isn't. And what isn't working, once identified, can be fixed. The framework for learning from pressure failures has 5 components. Component 1, temporal separation. The analysis of a pressure failure should not happen in the emotional heat of the moment. In the immediate aftermath of a failure, your emotional state, shame, disappointment, frustration, or the defensive instinct to externalize blame, will distort your perception and produce analysis that's more about managing your feelings than extracting accurate information. Give yourself a window. For minor failures, a few hours. For significant ones, a day or two. Then, return to it with the Stoic's analytical posture. Clear eyes, honest assessment, no defensive distortions. Component 2, specific forensics. Vague analysis produces vague lessons. The untrained performer's post-failure analysis sounds like this. I fell apart. I choked. I couldn't handle the pressure. These observations are useless. They don't tell you anything specific about what happened or what to do about it. Precise forensics sounds like this. My thinking became outcome-focused rather than process-focused approximately 5 minutes into the high-stakes phase, which is when my communication started to fragment. The trigger appears to have been the unexpected objection in the 3rd segment, which I hadn't prepared for, and which activated a defensive response that I didn't have a protocol to interrupt. Now you have specific, actionable information. You know what to prepare for. You know what protocol to build. You know what to practice. Component 3, type identification. Different types of pressure failures teach different lessons. A preparation failure tells you that your training wasn't comprehensive or challenging enough. The solution is more thorough, more realistic preparation. An execution failure tells you that your skills need more pressure testing. The solution is more practice under simulated high-stakes conditions. A mental management failure tells you that your psychological protocols need development. The solution is more deliberate practice of the specific mental skills that broke down. Understanding which type of failure you're dealing with directs your development efforts where they'll have the most impact. Component 4, pattern recognition over time. Individual failures contain specific lessons. Patterns of failure contain structural lessons about your development trajectory. Keep records. Over time, review them for patterns. Do failures cluster in particular types of situations? Under particular levels of time pressure? During particular phases of extended performance? These patterns reveal the specific areas of your mental game that need systematic development, as opposed to isolated events that might be contextual and not predictive. Component 5, adversarial simulation. Once you've identified what went wrong, build training that specifically targets it. If you failed because unexpected challenges hijacked your preparation, build unexpected challenges into your training. If you failed because extended performance degraded your later phase decision quality, train deliberately in conditions of fatigue. If you failed because high audience intensity disrupted your focus, practice in front of progressively more challenging audiences. The failure maps the terrain of your weakness. The training is the expedition to transform that weakness into strength. There's a deeper truth here worth naming explicitly. The performers who become genuinely bulletproof under pressure are almost always those who have experienced significant pressure failures, not those who have been protected from them. The failure is not the problem. What you do with it is what matters. Perform at your peak. When everything is on the line. Every principle in this book has been building toward this chapter. The pressure routines, the attentional training, the reappraisal skills, the physical practices, the confidence architecture, the mistake management protocols. All of it is preparation for the moments when everything is truly on the line. And those moments are different from ordinary pressure situations. They have characteristics that require specific, additional preparation. The stakes are maximum. The attention is intense. The window is often narrow. And the consequences, in both directions, are significant enough to create a specific kind of psychological weight that can overwhelm even those who handle ordinary pressure well. Let's talk about what separates performance in ultimate stakes moments from performance under normal pressure. The first difference is magnitude acceptance, the ability to fully acknowledge the significance of the moment without being paralyzed by it. Most people's approach to high-stakes moments swings between two dysfunctional extremes. Either they try to minimize the importance of the moment to reduce the pressure they feel. It's just another presentation. Or they become so overwhelmed by the magnitude that they can't function. The Stoic approach is neither. It's full, clear-eyed acknowledgement. This matters. The stakes are real. I understand exactly what's at stake. And then, immediately, deliberately, a shift to process. And the only thing I can do about it right now is execute excellently in the next few minutes. So that's what I'm doing. The acknowledgement is honest. The refocus is deliberate. Together, they allow you to carry the full weight of a significant moment without being crushed by it. The second difference is that ultimate stakes situations require what I call emergency protocol layers, backup systems for when your standard approaches aren't delivering. A performance aircraft has multiple redundant systems precisely because the situations where those systems are most needed are also the situations most likely to cause system failures. Your mental performance under ultimate pressure needs the same architecture. If your primary focus technique isn't working, and under extreme pressure it sometimes won't, you have a secondary. If your confidence anchor isn't activating cleanly, you have a specific memory of peak performance ready to deploy. If your breathing technique is being overridden by extreme physiological activation, you have a physical movement pattern that can interrupt the feedback loop. Build these layers. Test them in training. Know which backup you're going to turn to if the primary fails. The third difference is the power of pre-performance identity reinforcement. The deliberate, specific evocation of your performance identity immediately before the ultimate moment. This is not generic positive self-talk. It's the specific activation of your most capable self. The version of you that has prepared, that has survived previous challenges, that knows how to perform when it matters. Athletes have rituals for this. Marcus Aurelius had his meditations. He literally wrote to himself as a reminder of his commitments and capabilities before facing the demands of the day. Military leaders in decisive engagements have used specific pre-battle practices to access their highest command presence. Develop your own. It should be brief, specific, evidence-based, and practiced enough to be automatic. The last thing you do before the ultimate moment begins is call forward your most capable self and make a clear internal commitment to let that self perform. The fourth difference is consequence detachment during execution. This is subtle and important. In ultimate stakes situations, the weight of consequences can become so present that it parasitizes your cognitive bandwidth, demanding attention that should be directed at execution. You cannot perform excellently while also mentally managing the full weight of what failure would mean. The technique is not denial. It's deliberate, temporary parking. I know what's at stake. I've already reckoned with it, honestly. And right now, for the duration of this execution, I'm setting it aside because it's not helpful here. The consequences are real. Your awareness of them is real, and they're parked. Your attention is on this next action, this next decision, this next moment. After the performance, you pick them back up. During it, they stay parked. The fifth and final difference in ultimate stakes performance is the ability to access what athletes call flow states, the condition of complete absorption in execution where self-consciousness disappears. Performance becomes effortless and time seems to alter. Flow states are more accessible in ultimate stakes situations than most people realize, because the conditions that produce flow, clear goals, immediate feedback, a match between challenge and skill, complete focus, are all present in extreme form during high-stakes performance. The activation level is already high. The focus is already narrowed. The stakes create clarity about what matters. What prevents flow in ultimate stakes situations is almost always excessive self-monitoring, the internal audience watching your own performance and evaluating it in real time. Turn that audience off. Turn your attention completely outward, toward the task, toward what's actually happening in front of you, away from your own performance as an object of observation. The Stoics called this kathekon, appropriate action without attachment to how it appears. Do what the moment requires, completely, without watching yourself do it. When you achieve this in an ultimate stakes moment, you'll know it, and you'll remember it for the rest of your life. Develop pressure instincts that react perfectly without thinking. The highest level of pressure mastery is not excellence achieved through effortful technique. It's excellence achieved through automaticity, responses so deeply conditioned that they deploy without conscious direction, in the same way an experienced driver steers through a skid without deciding to steer. This is what pressure instincts are, not reflexes in the biological sense, conditioned responses that have been built through thousands of repetitions in thousands of contexts until they are as automatic as breathing. The Stoics had a term for the person who had reached this level: sophos, the sage. Not someone who tried hard to be virtuous, but someone in whom virtue had become second nature. The ethical equivalent of what we're describing in performance terms. Excellence so internalized that it no longer requires effort. It simply is. This level is not the destination you reach after mastering the previous chapters. It's what emerges from practicing the previous chapters long enough, consistently enough, with enough deliberate intention that all of it starts operating below the level of conscious control. But there are specific practices that accelerate this emergence. The first is massive repetition under varying conditions. Pressure instincts are built through sheer volume of practice across diverse contexts, not 300 repetitions in the same comfortable setting. 3,000 repetitions across wildly varying conditions, difficulty levels, emotional states, and environments. The variance is what makes instincts robust. A response trained only in one context is context-dependent. It works when conditions match the training and fails when they don't. A response trained across hundreds of varied contexts becomes genuinely context-independent. It works anywhere because it's been learned everywhere. The second practice is deliberate pressure escalation in training. Normal training rarely produces the level of physiological activation that real pressure situations do. This means responses trained only in normal conditions have never been tested at the activation levels where you'll actually need them. Escalate the pressure in training intentionally. Increase the stakes of practice scenarios. Introduce audiences. Add consequences to training performance. Create time pressure. Introduce unexpected complications. The goal is to train your responses in conditions that at least approximate the activation level of real performance, so they're available when activation is high. Military training does this masterfully. The conditions in elite military training are designed not just to challenge, but to genuinely overwhelm, because the training is preparation for conditions that will genuinely overwhelm. And the only reliable way to build instincts that work under those conditions is to practice in conditions that approach them. The third practice is instinct auditing through reflective review. After high-pressure performances, examine which of your responses were automatic and which required conscious effort. The automatic responses are your instincts in action. The effortful ones are the areas where instinct hasn't yet formed. Target your training toward the effortful responses. The goal is to convert as many of them as possible to automatic, to reduce the cognitive load of high-pressure performance to the point where your mind has significant spare capacity for the genuinely novel elements of each situation. The fourth practice is scenario visualization at high fidelity. You can build pressure instincts through mental rehearsal as well as physical practice. If the mental rehearsal is sufficiently detailed, emotionally vivid, and specific. This is not casual daydreaming about success. It's deliberate, structured mental practice at the level of detail, where your nervous system can't fully distinguish it from physical experience. You visualize the pressure situation in granular sensory detail. You feel the activation. You encounter the challenge, and you execute your trained response in your mind with the same completeness and precision you would in reality. Elite athletes, surgeons, pilots, and performers across domains use this technique extensively. The neuroscience is clear. High-fidelity mental practice activates many of the same neural pathways as physical practice and contributes meaningfully to the development of automatic responses. Combine mental and physical practice. Use mental rehearsal to prepare your instincts for situations you can't easily replicate in physical training. The specific meeting configuration, the specific type of audience, the specific escalation of stakes. Then use physical practice to build the motor patterns and physiological conditioning that mental rehearsal can only partially develop. The fifth and final element of pressure instinct development is the patience to let it emerge. This is the part of the journey that many high achievers find most difficult. They want the results now. They want to implement the practices in this book and feel bulletproof within weeks. Genuine instincts take time. The neural pathways that constitute automatic responses are built slowly through accumulated repetition and consolidation. You cannot rush them any more than you can rush the growth of a tree. What you can do is plant, water, and tend consistently. The Stoic perspective on time is useful here. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the importance of acting fully in each present moment, without being attached to outcomes or timelines. Do the practice today. Do it tomorrow. Do it next year. The cumulative effect over time produces a mind that responds to pressure not with effort, but with instinct. Not with trained techniques deployed consciously, but with automatic excellence deployed naturally. When you reach this level, something extraordinary happens. Pressure stops feeling like a challenge to manage. It feels like a call to perform at your highest level. And you answer it. Make pressure your competitive advantage in every area of life. We've traveled far in this book. From the neurological mechanics of how untrained minds collapse under stress, through the philosophical framework of the Stoics, through the specific practices of breathing and attention and body awareness, and mistake management and confidence building, all the way to the deepest level, where pressure responses become instinctive and automatic. Now it's time to pull back and see what all of this adds up to, because the ultimate destination of the Stoic mindset is not just pressure survival. It's not even just pressure performance. It's pressure advantage. The remarkable place where you have trained so thoroughly and thought so clearly about your relationship with high-stakes situations that pressure doesn't just cease to be your enemy. It becomes your ally. your differentiator, your competitive edge in every arena where you choose to show up. This is available to you. Let's talk about how you get there. The first dimension of pressure advantage is relative positioning under stress. In any high-stakes situation, there is a distribution of performance quality among the people involved. Some people's performance degrades significantly under pressure. Some holds approximately steady. And some, the people who have done this work, actually improves. If your performance improves under pressure while others degrades, your relative position in any competitive context changes dramatically in the exact moments when stakes are highest. The board meeting, the client pitch, the crucial negotiation, the championship game, these are the moments that determine outcomes. If you can reliably perform better than your baseline in these moments while others are performing below their baseline, you have a structural competitive advantage that compounds across your career. This is not a small thing. It is, arguably, one of the highest leverage investments you can make in your professional development. Not because pressure situations are common, but because they are disproportionately determinative of outcomes. The second dimension of pressure advantage is trust and reputation. People who consistently perform under pressure become the people others want, leading the critical initiatives, handling the difficult accounts, representing the organization in the highest stakes contexts. This reputation, once built, creates opportunities that remain inaccessible to people whose pressure performance is unreliable. The best opportunity is the one you're trusted to handle. And trust is built through demonstrated performance under pressure, consistently, over time. The third dimension is accelerated learning. Pressure situations provide a quality of feedback that comfortable situations simply cannot match. When everything is on the line, the consequences of your thinking and your execution are immediate, clear, and undeniable. You get an accurate, high-resolution picture of where your preparation was strong and where it fell short. Nothing is softened by social courtesy or institutional politeness. This feedback, used properly, with the forensic analysis we discussed in Chapter 12, accelerates development at a rate that comfortable, low-stakes practice simply cannot match. The person who deliberately seeks pressure learns faster than the person who avoids it. Over years and decades, this difference compounds into extraordinary capability. The fourth dimension is personal meaning. There is something that happens when a human being performs excellently in a genuinely high-stakes moment. Something beyond professional. Outcome, beyond reputation, beyond career consequence. There is an experience of full engagement, of rising to meet reality at its most demanding, of discovering that you are more than you thought you were when things were easy. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius didn't seek comfort. He sought the full exercise of his capabilities in the most demanding circumstances available to him. Not because he was a masochist, but because he understood that this was where a human being could genuinely discover what they were made of. Arete, the full flowering of one's excellence, requires challenge. It cannot exist in the absence of difficulty. The fifth dimension is transference across life domains. The mental skills developed for pressure performance in your professional life do not stay neatly contained there. Attentional control, reappraisal, physiological regulation, mistake recovery, sustainable confidence. These are skills of living, not just skills of performing. The executive who has built bulletproof focus for boardroom presentations finds that same focus available for parenting. The surgeon who has trained emotional regulation for high-stakes procedures finds that same regulation available for difficult personal relationships. The athlete who has built the ability to stay present under competitive pressure finds that presence available in the everyday moments that constitute the texture of a life. The Stoic mindset is not a professional performance tool. It is a life orientation. It is the practice of showing up fully, thinking clearly, acting with integrity, and maintaining composure. Not just when the cameras are on and the stakes are public, but in the daily private moments that nobody sees and that add up, over time, to the quality of a life. Here's what I want you to leave this book with, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived commitment. Pressure is coming. It always is. Life is not a sequence of comfortable situations interrupted by occasional challenges. For anyone who is genuinely alive to their potential, genuinely trying to do something that matters, genuinely showing up at the level their life is asking of them, pressure is a constant companion. You can fight it. You can avoid it. You can let it define the ceiling of what you're willing to attempt and the threshold beyond which you don't reach. Or you can train for it. You can build the mind that the Stoics built, not through luck or natural gift or rare psychology, but through deliberate, daily, committed practice. The breathing, the attention training, the reappraisal, the routines, the mistake protocols, the confidence architecture, the physical preparation, the instinct development, all of it is practice, and all of it compounds. Begin today with the first thing you've read in this book that resonated most deeply. Just one practice. Implement it consistently for 2 weeks until it begins to become habitual. Then add the next. The Stoics believed in eudaimonia, human flourishing, not happiness in the shallow sense, flourishing, the full, excellent exercise of your distinctly human capabilities in the face of everything life presents. Pressure, seen clearly, is not the obstacle to that flourishing. It's the arena where it happens. Step into it.